So thank you kindly, Andrew, for having me, and all of you from Poptech for attending. And I wanted to say one thing to Stephen, because he's also one of my heroes. I wanted to say that it's a really awesome talk he gave. Truly awesome, Stephen. And in the spirit of the Poptech Noika interview, for those of you who have had, how many of you already had it? Anybody had that Noika interview? You know where they ask you to say something about yourself that nobody knows, right? Or nobody. So I'm going to tell you something that nobody here probably knows, even if you've read my book, and that's in 1971. When I was an undergraduate at UC Berkeley, I went in as an architecture student in the School of Environmental Design. So I started off my 2 first years of college in architecture. I was, I think, 2 women in a class of 100 guys, and that was before AutoCAD. Remember, you had to do things by hand. At any rate, I decided that I was trying to design environments for people that would enhance their creativity of their minds, but I was just designing skyscrapers, so I decided that I would go into something that was more humanly meaningful, and I went into neurobiology and went on the inside out of looking at aspects of the mind and hormones in the mind, and some of my mentors, Frank Beach and Miriam Diamond, are the leaders in that field, of course, and they're the grandfather and grandmother of that entire field. So another thing was happening in UC Berkeley in 1971 that has a lot to do with what I've ended up doing in my life, and that was the feminist movement. 2 years earlier, had been a high school student, and some of you remember in the audience, we used to have the matching shoes and the matching purses with the mini skirts and the white boots, you know. So I went from that to dressing in my jeans, hiking boots, and joined the feminist movement at UC Berkeley, and everything was mandatory unisex dress, and guess what else? Mandatory unisex brains. And so all of us female feminists, there were a lot of male feminists too, but male feminists in those days, we decided that when we grew up and had sons, we were going to raise our sons with gender-neutral toys, and we were going to raise the next generation of sensitive men, and our future daughters-in-law would thank us for having raised these wonderful, sensitive male husbands. So that's kind of a context from where I went, and ended up then, of course, going to medical school. And I can remember asking one of my medical school professors after he just presented a beautiful piece of all this data and all the research, and I said, "What did you see in the female subjects?" He said, well, we don't study females. The menstrual cycle would just mess up the data. That was in 1978, 79. And what's interesting about that for me is I said, in my mind, I didn't say, how horrible, like we might, now you laugh, but we actually believe that that's the way it was supposed to be. I mean, we scientists didn't want to mess up the data. Of course, we've changed and gone a long way from that. So fast forward to 1993, 94. At 89, I had a son. So this was a big event in my life. I went into studying women's brains and women's psychiatry, and I specialized in women's psychiatry for many years before that. But then after I had my own son, voila, the scales from my eyes were lifted, and I started running a clinic called the Women's Mood and Hormone Clinic that had to do with a variety of things that have to do with the hormonal effects in a woman's brain during all of her life. And the 2-to-1 ratio in depression in women was a fascinating number to me, because why was that? And why did it start at 12, 13, 14 years old? Why was it 1-to-1 ratio in childhood, male to female? And why did it do this bifurcation right when the menstrual cycle started? And nobody knew anything about that. A lot of people didn't obviously care too much, but it was very interesting to me about what that was about. And it's clear that it had something to do with the hormones and the hormone cycle that did something to trigger some aspects of emotionality and mood disorders in women. So that's how I got into hormones in the brain in my own field in women's psychiatry. And I'm going to show you a couple of slides of brain scans that have told me, like, many of the things that I think you need to know about the female brain and the male brain. You'll notice the jealousy part up there and the need for commitment hemisphere. One of our other speakers looked at that slide earlier and says, I could just reverse this and say, no telephone skills, no need for commitment. We've got lots of email skills here. All right. Now, but this is really the flip side of yours, okay? For those of you who can't see that little tiny piece in the front, it says listening particle. Lame excuses land. And I must admit, my husband gets a solar plexus hit whenever I say, honey, you know, we need to have a long discussion about our relationship. There's a place in the male brain for that inducing terror. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you the cliff note. The cliff notes especially the men in the female brain is read page 39 in the book. That's the page where boys will be boys. But I wanted to tell you, let's see, where the bottom line for the birth of the female brain. Okay, what really makes us different? We all scientists know that you start off with female type circuits. The nature's default pattern is female in biology. What happens to make it different is that 8 weeks of fetal life in the male brain, the tiny testicles start pumping out huge amounts of testosterone that then marinate the brain, changing the circuitry from female type circuitry into male circuitry. And there you go, 2.0 to 2.5 times larger is a technical area actually called the area for sexual pursuit in the hypothalamus. So that doubles in size, amongst other things. So that really turns on the program. Remember, the Y chromosome turns on the whole male program, including the testicles and the testosterone production in the male. Then the female brain is left unperturbed by testosterone for the rest of gestation. And so by the time we're all born, we either have male or female brains. Okay, so we all know from then fast forwarding to the first 2 years of life, something I found out in doing the research, and any of you want to go to all of the research for the book in the back is 1,008 studies that are in the reference section of the book you all got, I know. So you can read the details for those of you who want to go several layers deeper. But the infantile puberty happens up to 9 to 10 to 12 months old in males. They have lots of testosterone. You guys, when you're that age, the testicles are making adult male levels of testosterone. And in the female, the ovaries are making adult female levels of estrogen for the first couple of years of life, up to 2 years old in the female brain. Then we go into a nice quiet period, the child brain, what's called the juvenile pause by pediatric endocrinologists. And the child brain, you know, you can do observations for 30 or 40 years like Eleanor Maccabee has done in preschools, and what you see is little girls, what do? They do the relationship role play games, like you be the daddy and I'll be the mommy, or you be the doctor, I'll be the patient. So they play relation, and the boys will sit and do that a little bit, but then they're off and running, because little boys like to do a fantasy type of play called pretending they're some kind of superhero and they're fighting off the enemy. I can't tell you the number of those little superhero dolls I bought for my son at that stage. And the rough and tumble play, of course, in primates is kind of the technical word for what little primate males do, a lot more than the primate females. And also the male brain, which I'm getting into quite a lot now, is really wired for action in different ways, which you'll have to wait till the book comes out to see what that's all about. So my son, I give him gender-neutral toy. I can remember I gave him a doll one Christmas because I was trying to practice what I preached. He pulls the doll out of he grabs her by the torso, and the long legs are interestingly used for spears, right? So that's how far my attempt to do gender. My son is like a computer nerd at this point. That's all he does, and he says lots of things that are awesome, and et cetera, Stephen. So the language of the teenage boy. Teen brain, okay, teen girl brain. The waves of estrogen and progesterone that start from the brain, signaling the ovaries to do waves for 2 weeks of estrogen, and then remember ovulation. As soon as ovulation happens, the ovary is spewing out progesterone, and that's the last 2 weeks right before the onset of menses. So you get this double tsunami every month of a different type of hormone, which actually, in certain areas in the hippocampus, it changes some of the synaptic connections up to 25%. So they grow and they retract, and they grow and they retract, and you can actually watch this in time-lapse photography. So very interesting. 12.1 years old is the average age of onset of menstruation in Caucasian girls. It's actually about 11 years old in African-American girls, and it's about 13 in Asian girls. So there's a spectrum that has to do with something that's a bit diverse with different racial groups. Teen boys. Important to know, teen boys between ages of 10 and 15 have a 25-fold increase in testosterone. So you guys, we women have to understand that those male brain circuits that were laid down in fetal life all of a sudden are running on jet fuel. And so that certainly has lots of behavioral changes, and all of that's what page 39 is all about, but it's about how the male brain starts getting all kinds of thoughts about girls' body parts that they never had before, until they start sharing that in what we call locker room talk or hallway talk. Teen boys are a little bit nervous about the fact that maybe they're weird and other guys aren't thinking the same thoughts they are, but then when they find out they are, it's very relieving to know that it's mutual. It's a mutuality, Stephen. Okay. All right. Emotional brain differences, which we all know and love. So I'm going to give you the cliff notes to the book about the estrogen increases in oxytocin in the mommy brain. Now remember that oxytocin is, you've probably all heard of oxytocin, which is now called the pair bonding or the bonding hormone or the hormone of monogamy. One of the things that turns on the production in the brain of oxytocin is estrogen. So in the teen girl brain, and for all of a fertile woman's life, her estrogen is ramping up that oxytocin and the bonding hormone. Men, you have it too. You get a lot of a release of oxytocin after orgasm. So sex is good for you guys to have the bonding hormone. So more sex is good. All right. So the female brain has a lot of advantages that have been measured, and I'll just summarize it for you, that the nonverbal cues and reading faces, emotional nuance, the memory for emotional detail. Actually, criminologists have known that for a long time, that the details of something that happens that's intensely emotional, females will actually remember the details, and we think it has something to do with the fact that the hippocampus in the female brain is larger. You guys have a larger amygdala. That's the part that measures lots of emotion, fear, aggression, and rage, okay? Those mirror neurons are the things that when you're watching another person's facial expression, if you see them get sad, it triggers your brain's sadness circuits. Mirror means it's mirroring. So we females have more active mirror neurons. Males and females all have a lot of mirror neurons, but the females have been measured to be more active. And then facial expressions, fascinating piece of work out of Bowdoin College, very close to here, last year showed that actually testosterone ratings of the neutral faces in boys, well, the faces that are neutral, that they showed to them were misinterpreted almost as being more angry if there's more testosterone. They actually gave testosterone to females, and they changed their rating of the faces that were more friendly to faces that were more angry. Fascinating experiment in terms of the really behavioral robust effects of testosterone. And then, of course, oxytocin. If you give, some of you may know the studies out of both Europe and out of Stanford of giving nasal spray, oxytocin nasal spray to men in a paradigm, that's an economic paradigm, where they're given placebo nasal spray versus oxytocin, and those guys that got, and it was men, they didn't want to give it to females for a lot of reasons that have to do with pregnancy, but the nasal spray for oxytocin made the men trust their financial advisor more versus placebo, to the point of something like 51% more trust to invest money. So it's an interesting game. That's a fun one to look at. So oxytocin nasal spray makes more trusting males. You can see the pharmaceutical companies may have a new product here. So I wanted to say something about at least the male advantage. Is you guys, by starting in teen years, because of your testosterone, you have a slightly lower stress reaction in your brain. So that's a male advantage, which is nice to have. So I want to turn just for my last 5 or 6 minutes to what I think the sex differences in the brain have to do with differences in society. That mood disorders difference 2 to 1 in females is really very important, I think. Autism disorders, remember, are 8 to 1 ratio in males, so there are some things that males have more. Violent aggression is 20 to 1 ratio, more in males, and that seems to be both male brain circuits and the testosterone-related phenomenon. 90% of a prison population is male. But the area that I most look at are the female mood disorders in that 2 to 1 starting at puberty, and the Women's Mood and Hormone Clinic, which I started at 93, 94, basically sees women, and I feel like if you help a mother who has postpartum depression, or you help a woman who has depression, you end up helping a whole family, and then you end up helping a whole community. So there's many layers of being able to help a woman who's got depression. And remember, 24% of women will have a clinical depression sometime in their life. So that's a big number, and worldwide you can imagine that we're better at treating it, even though it's still stigmatized in this country a lot. Worldwide it's pretty disastrous, and some of the studies actually out of Pakistan are coming that postpartum depression in women really is not being addressed, and those children die a lot more frequently. So there's lots of consequences of postpartum depression not being recognized. And then of course I treat teen girls that have mood disorders and anxiety at the beginning of their menstrual cycle, and usually it's their perimenopausal moms aged 45 to 50 that call up and say, I'd like an appointment, Dr. Brizendine, for me and my daughter. All right, so it's like a mother-daughter appointments come in because there's a 14-fold increase in mood disorder and negative moods in the perimenopause for a brief period of time of a couple of years, while the estrogen fluctuations of that wave are ratcheting down and the brain is readjusting to being on a different estrogen supply. Okay, so the take-home message, bottom line, is that there is no unisex brain. There's maybe unisex clothing, but there's no unisex brain. So you're allowed to say it now. And I think that on a global level, you know, the reality is that if you look at the genetics, obviously half of the highest IQ points in the world are male brains and half are female brains, and we need to use it all to come up with creative solutions to all of the problems that we all are discussing here now. But I think what's really different right now, and I know you guys back in the era of Plato and Socrates, when the men started having lots of slaves and things and free time, whatever, we women, and actually in the year 1900, women had on average 14 to 15 pregnancies and 10 babies. Now, that is, and the average age of death in 1900 in this country was 49 years old for a woman. So I would have been long dead. And, you know, that has changed dramatically over the last 100 years and will change dramatically because we have complete control of our fertility for the first time ever in human history. Obviously, access to having that complete control is an issue that hopefully a lot of you smart people in this room will be helping to solve in the next 25 years. But that complete control then means women can have 0 children, 1 child, 2 children, say, and then she's living 40 years past 51 years old is the average age of menopause. So we women are living 40, 50 years beyond the menopause and past childbearing years. So there's a lot of years of productivity, and it used to be spent in having 15, 16 pregnancies and many, many babies. I think that the female brain has been sort of unplugged from an entire lifetime of 49 years of raising children to having a period of her life, maybe 5, maybe 10 years, where she's actively very engaged. My son just turned 18, so we're in that stage in my house of unplugging from pup care, as I call it, tending, more or less. At any rate, he emailed me last night to say, Mom, where's the meat in the fridge? So at any rate, he's almost out of the house, but not quite. He says, didn't you say you bought me 2 packs of that salami? Whatever. I emailed him back saying, honey, go to the market, get some. At any rate, so you can see the mommy brain for me is like still partially plugged in. It's wanting to unplug. He wants to unplug too. But it's going to be a whole new ball game for the female brains that are the 50% of the smartest ones in the entire world to try and help solve some of the problems. So I just thought I was, in the spirit of Andrew's question to me, my dream is that in the future, biology will not be destiny because we will have a deep understanding of what makes the male and female brain different, and then a deep respect for the talents that we all have that are different and similar. And hopefully the male and female brain can stop warring and start joining forces to solve some of the real problems for humankind in the world. Thank you very much.